All right, hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. I'm excited for this next hour. I had a chance to speak with our guest speaker briefly a couple weeks ago. I mean, what is time at this point? I don't even remember when we last saw each other on this virtual platform, but I'm excited to hear from her. I got a chance to hear, the good, the not so good, and the magical happening in her life. So I'm sure she's going to share some of that with you all today. But I just want to go over some quick housekeeping rules before we get started here. This hour is going to fly by super quickly, so I would love to have you participate. Turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. I see a couple have already turned their cameras on, and I really appreciate that. We believe in visibility. So, if you haven't showered today, great. We can't smell you, so there's no judgment. If your house is a mess or your workspace is a mess, put your virtual backgrounds on. Again, we would just love to see your smiling faces. And I've muted everyone upon entrance, but I can't stress enough, would love to hear from you at any point throughout this hour. So feel free to hop off of mute when you want to share your dream last night. If you have some tips and tricks yourself, feel free to share that. Come off mute whenever you feel called to do so. If anyone has any sensitive information and you would like to be kept anonymous, feel free to write to me privately. You'll find me under Mariella Marie in the chat box. You can write to me privately and I'll flag that to our guest speaker and I'll keep you anonymous. If you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording. I know we live in a world where everyone is multitasking, and I'm sure that our guest speaker is going to speak a little bit about that and how we can stay balanced with our multitasking and to not be overwhelmed in this crazy world. But I invite everyone to be present with us for this next hour. Stop multitasking if you can. And then you can rewatch this video, the recording of this video later on Power to Fly, and you can take notes vigorously there. The last thing I'll say is that we would love for you to follow us on socials and also keep your boundaries with socials. Put the phone, don't go to the toilet with the phone. You got to set your boundaries. I'm sure that our guest speaker is also going to speak about that. I hope so. Anyway, these are my questions I'm kind of just throwing in there from the beginning. So feel free to chat about this later. Follow us on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got coming up from you. I want to pass the mic now to our guest speaker. I'll shout you all out in the chat box who you're writing, where you're calling from. And I love to see all the movement in the chat box. So thank you for that. But for now, I'm going to pass the mic to Sumedha. Let us know a little bit about yourself, how you can learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mariella, for setting us up for success today. I'm Sumedha. I am a software engineer by education, actually, and product owner by profession. I love public speaking, writing as a hobby. Really, a lot of my passion goes towards emotional learning, improving myself, self-growth, personal development. That's why I have this topic here that I would love to talk about. I really believe that everything that we do is training us in some way or the other. And the conversations we're having, how we're talking to people. And once I started realizing that, I was like, I spend 40 to 50 hours at work, sometimes on autopilot and sometimes doing things a certain way. And I used to compartmentalize that a lot with my personal life. But then I started believing that I could actually leverage the time to train myself to whatever goals I have. Like my goals were to just be like a better human being. Or my emotional training. So I could leverage that time for that as I'm working. So a lot of the conversation today is around that.
Beautiful. And I love this last point here. I was excited to just, echo this last point that you put here, that if we spend, we spend at work every week, if we spent 40 hours plus at work being happy, then maybe we'd be more peaceful in the world and with our personal quality of life. So I definitely echo that sentiment. And maybe folks on the chat can let us know if you believe in that as well, so that we can just put more effort into that in our personal lives. You have a great presentation set up here, so I'm going to click through as you flag me to do so, but I would love to pass the mic back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. And I'll ask you too. I just realized later, I was like, animations might not have been the best idea, but the retrospect is always easy. So just a disclaimer, this is a lot of like my opinions, that knowledge that I've gained over time by learning, training, educating myself, but I'm not a professional medical advisor. So, and I know that because this topic is so deep and there's some questions around mental health. So I just want to qualify this presentation and this talk with that. And if there is something that you need to seek medical advice on, please do. I'm really not trying to speak to those elements. This is just my personal experience and what I've learned through that. But with that, I wanted to start with some studies I was reading. Again, self-education is important here. So starting the day, I was thinking like, oh, a lot of times I start my day with what's my one thing? What's my intention for today? But then apparently we have more than 6,000 thoughts a day. That's the most recent study. So when I paused to think about how many thoughts from yesterday am I aware of? Like just think about that, right? Like how many thoughts from yesterday are we aware of? Maybe 10, maybe 20. Sometimes I struggle with actually remembering what I ate yesterday. So that means we're on autopilot so much of the time. And these thoughts are driving our behaviors, these thoughts are driving our actions, but most of the time we're not even aware of that. Studies have shown that 47% of waking hours are actually spent in mind wandering. And mind wandering subsequently leads to unhappiness because we're not directing our mind towards certain goals or intentions. It's just going wherever. It could be going to all the problems in our lives or worries. And typically, if you go to the next slide, Mariella, we start our day, we're excited, we might be peaceful. Maybe you're like me, you get your meditation and your yoga in, and then something happens. You might want to click through a few times, Mariella, just like a random news article, like you read something, COVID numbers, something happened in politically in your country, right? And that brings you down. And you realize like, oh, you know what? Like now I'm not feeling so great. But then you give a great presentation at work, you get a lot of kudos from coworkers, people are telling you like how impactful that was, and you start feeling great about yourself. You're like, yes, I like made impact, I did well, I'd worked hard for this. And through that meeting, after the meeting, you realize kids in the next room, they missed virtual class and they just like slept through it. And now you're feeling guilty. You're like, oh my God, like I am not a good parent. I was not paying attention. They missed their class. How are we going to make up? And so on, like various things happen throughout the day. If you click a few more times, you'll see like really a lot of different things can happen. And by the end of the day, you still might have a lot of work to do and you have your to-do list. And you really, instead of feeling creative and you want to brainstorm or feeling inspired, you're feeling exhausted, stressed, fatigued. You're just like, I just don't want to do. Or if you show up for those meetings or if you show up for those tasks, you might not show up as your best self because so many things have affected you throughout the day. That's kind of what happens when we run on autopilot, right? But these things are going to happen. There's not a lot we can do about controlling the external. So really the questions then become like, how do we show up and like what happens, especially at work when these things are happening to all of us in our environment, especially now we're more aware of that. We're not all segregated sitting in a building, oblivious to what's happening to the rest of the world. What do we do at work? Like, how do we show up? If you go to the next slide, this is where like feelings and emotions come up. I feel, at least for me, I'll speak for me, where I wasn't very much of a feeling person. If you ask me like what I felt, was like great or like I'm angry. Like maybe those were the two words that I used to go to. And I think that has a lot to do with just messaging that we get intentionally or unintentionally growing up or from our surroundings. Maybe we cry and we're told like, hey, it's not okay to cry in public. Or maybe we throw a fit and we misunderstand that as, oh, it's not okay to be angry. And then I personally also used to identify with certain emotions. I used to think I am a so-and-so person. Like I would say, I'm a very jolly person. I'm a happy person. Or no, I'm an angry person. I used to say this a lot. I can get angry really fast, but I will also be really peaceful really fast, right? Like I would identify so strongly with these emotions that I thought, this is the package I came in. Like this is who I am. And then talking about feelings also, I perceive like sometimes would make other people uncomfortable. And I would worry that, okay, if I'm identifying with my emotions as angry, what are they going to think if they think I'm an angry person? Or say I'm a happy person. Oh, she's too happy, bubbly kind of a person, right? What does that image mean for me? Because I'm self-identifying it. It was only like 4 or 5 years back when I realized, because the next slide, that emotions and emotional resilience is actually a skill and you can train that. So I didn't come in this package, or at least so I believe. I am not an angry person. I'm not a happy person. I have now been told that I'm one of the most peaceful people by some people. And it is interesting to see that because I would have never associated those words with my personality. But then if those are things that I can train and maybe I show up differently in different situations, I can be happy in certain places. I can show up as peaceful in certain places. I can show up as more empowered in certain places. I can actually train these emotions as a skill. Computer programming, like I would like to learn. I'm a software engineer by background. So like I can pick up Python, I can pick up Java, I can pick up all these different programming languages. Maybe I can pick up these different emotions as well as train myself over time. Mariella is thumbs upping the reference there. You'll see some engineering references, I think, in my talk today. So that was a big aha moment for me because that gave me faith that I can actually evolve. And then next, I just wanted to address, Mariela, if you go to the next slide, is the reason I do say like feelings, we need to accept, acknowledge feelings, not just for ourselves, but for each other, is things that you can actually leverage them for is to build deeper connection. If you're really intentional about their feelings, then you can use that to build deeper connection. Whenever I have chosen to be vulnerable in certain spaces while being mindful of how I'm showing up, I have friendships that aren't time-wise, like they're friends that maybe I made in the last year, but I feel like, oh, there's such a deep connection because of the way I showed up, right? And I think that talking about emotions, or not necessarily always talking, but just showing up with our emotions and being aware of that really helps with that. Helping each other in support. I have friends, a few of them on this call today, who I know like I can lean on if there is an emotion. Like I know that they're not going to judge me because they have experience. And I think that's when we realize like feelings are just a part of being a human being. And we all go through waves, and then people can show up to support us. Also, actually, practically, it helps you get to the heart of problems and find better solutions that are more impactful. A specific example for this, I was talking to a leader earlier today, and she was talking about how she started her meeting with just a simple like, hey, why there's a lot of confidence in the team these days. So why the confidence? And that led to them realizing that, oh, she really likes certain meetings and she shows up as confident in that meeting. Why does she like that meeting? Because the meeting has agendas, which led to deciding like, oh, all of our meetings are going to have agendas, because that's what, if it's making the whole team more confident in the execution of the team. Now, it's a very practical outcome, started with an emotion. But instead, if you had started the conversation, how do you like, is this meeting okay? Like you might not have actually figured out the solution that is more impactful. But again, like actually talking about feelings, especially at work, especially in a work environment, you can help build emotional resilient team. You can have higher retention, job satisfaction. People like to come to places where people can feel safe. They're connected to each other, and they actually handle stress better. Like things happen, COVID happens. If your team can actually keep performing at a higher level because they're more efficient, emotionally resilient, that's really good for both business and your team. With that, on the next slide, I think I have some tips on. I did code, so I'm not so much of a numbers person, but I know that some of us are. So I wanted to throw out some numbers that studies have shown that happier people actually increase revenue by 4 times. They take 10x fewer sick days. They are 20% more productive. They actually sell 20% more. So there are proven results when measured over time across various companies. And I have some references in there if you want to really read those. And then last but not the least, on the next slide, Mariella, just a few tips on what I found helpful when sharing and listening to emotions, because I know that especially at work, this can be a little bit awkward, to say the least. Think sharing without blame. So if I show up as like, I'm frustrated with your meeting, that's probably not a very productive way to share that. So taking accountability for, I am frustrated here, like this is my issue, not yours. But maybe you're sharing that afterwards, like, hey, this is what happened. And this is what I did to resolve that, right? And not turning emotions into excuses. Again, like, I was frustrated, I don't like your meetings, I'm not gonna come to them. But that's really not that useful. But then instead sharing like, hey, this thing doesn't really work that well. This is what I experienced. How about we work together to figure out a new way? And that maybe leads to like agendas, as I was talking about earlier. When listening, just listen. Hold a non-judgmental free space, like judgment-free space. Not even going to sympathy almost. It's just listen. Like they're not broken. They're sharing a feeling. They'll experience it, and they'll experience something else tomorrow. If somebody's sad, they'll experience happiness tomorrow. That happens. So just like sometimes we all, which is a really beautiful human thing. I know I do this a lot. I want to fix things. I want to help people. That's just an instinct. And then I have to remind myself, is like, no, maybe they just need space for sharing and being listened to. I think that's about it. That might be the last. There's maybe one more slide. Oh, resources. Yes, thanks. I forgot about this. So I noted some resources that I have used, some references at the bottom for the studies that I've referenced if you're interested in reading more studies. And then the resources at the top. Quimby app is an application by Mindful Use of Technology. I use it personally to track my emotions during the workday and like how I've been going. It helps teams. It allows teams to track morale together and like talk about, hey, how's the team doing overall? And then I'm also hosting a free meditation series, which is basically emotional training. That's how I got introduced to it. At work, somebody was hosting that, and now to pay it forward, I host it. So you're welcome to join that if you're interested in learning more about emotions or meditations or any of that. But really, if you look up, there's a lot of resources available on these topics.
Thank you so much for this thorough review and your presentation, hitting so many nails on the head here. So I know some folks might be taking a screenshot of this. I do want to remind you all that you will get a rewatch email, and we'll have Sumita put these links in so that you can access them easily in your rewatch email. And you will have submitted some great questions offline. We're going to go through these questions one by one. If you see your question come up on the screen, for example, we'll start with this first question here. If this was your question that you submitted, feel free to hop off of mute or write in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. If this is not your question, again, we still want to hear from you, so feel free to hop off of mute or write in the chat box. I'm also just going to shout out where folks are calling from so that we can, see the power of digital community here and know that we have more things in common than we tend to be aware of. So I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina. Sumeda is calling from Dallas, Texas. We've got Austin, Texas representing Buenos Aires, Argentina. We've got another Austin Texan here, California, Chicago, Illinois, New Jersey, Boston. Great. So if you're just joining us or if you didn't get a chance to write in the chat box, would love to know where you're calling from. And then Sumeda, I'd ask for you to keep this in mind to, we're calling from different places in the world. So as these questions come up on the screen, if you can be mindful of that. So let's start with this first question here. What exactly is emotional resilience? And I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence, and especially in the workplace. So I love that you're approaching this as, okay, well, let's train, let's not just, historically speaking, it's been, you're expected to check it at the door, not engage with your emotions or your feelings. So I love that. I think you mentioned it might be awkward, but I think it's awkward because it just, historically speaking, there's been no space to explore that. So anyway, I'd love for you to maybe dive in deeply here if you feel called to do so on this question.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love this question too. The engineer in me, I had to be like, yeah, I know. I remember reading resilience in undergrad on engineering, and I looked it up. I was like, what was the material resilience? It actually is very similar. In material science, resilience is the ability of a material to go back to its elastic state after a lot of stress has been put on it, right? And what's the breaking point where it can't go back? And I think of emotional resilience very similarly, which is both things are going to happen externally. It is happening, like COVID is happening around the world. It's happening to all of us. Like there are certain situations, traffic happens to all of us. What is the stress or perceived stress that we can handle? And then how fast can we go back to our original state, to that elastic state? Because there is a state that is healthy for us emotionally, mentally, and physically. When stress responses occur, we are releasing hormones in our body. There's like cortisol, there's oxytocin. These are stress response or like love hormones that are being released to balance each other. There is a balanced state for our body. But even if we just don't think of it so biologically, just emotionally, right? There is a happy state that we have all experienced. So how fast can we go back to that happy, peaceful state after a stress response occurs? And then how much stress can we handle? That's how I think of emotional resilience. I don't think of it as not experiencing an emotion, and I wanted to qualify that. It's really hard to not experience stress or sadness or anger, and at least for me, that has not been the goal. Is again, like material, that energy is put on the material when the load is put on that material. It also is released after the load is released, right? So it's similar as like, okay, I went through sadness, and then how fast can I let go of it and not hold on to it, and then go back to my neutral, happy, more peaceful state. That's how I think of emotional resilience.
And just to bring this to our present, I love that you're bringing COVID into the situation as well, into this definition. Social media, is it supporting emotional resilience in your opinion or not? And how can we be more mindful about that? Because what I don't want people to get from this conversation is that you need to figure out how to be okay just for the sake of putting on the facade, and that is not authentic, but I see on social media it perpetuates this, everything's okay. We're living in our utopia all the time. So how can folks be more mindful to not fall into that trap, essentially?
Yeah, that's a really good boundaries. Like what's the place of boundaries here? Um, I know Kay had talked to this a while back in her talk as well. Like intention is really important, I think, when it comes to these things. Social media, for example, as a tool, it's great for connecting with people, especially right now. Like I haven't been able to see my mom and my family in over a year because she's in India. So certain tools have really helped me connect and stay in touch with my family, making sure that larger community in India that I'm connected to are okay, right? And if I didn't have social media, I wouldn't know that. Um, at the same time, there are times in social media where there's a lot of news, there's a lot of articles, there's a lot of arguments that happen, which can trigger anger, frustration, sadness. So, what is my intention with social media? Which for me is really staying connected with people. It's not to get entertainment, it's not to get news. For me, that's my intention. So then I leverage social media accordingly. I leverage it to go to events and see, like, oh, what are the events? I literally log into Facebook maybe once a day. That's my poison of choice, if I may say so. Uh, I log into it once a day. I'll check what events are happening. I'll see if there's something I need to immediately respond to, and then that's about it. Like, or I'll time box my time that I spend on it. Um, I don't use it right now for my news channels, my news or my news intake, as well as just like entertainment. And that's mostly because it's not necessarily, I'm not saying that's the bad way to get your news, but I do know that anytime news is shared there and there are a bunch of opinions that go with it, I'm really focused a lot on the opinions rather than the news, which is triggering for me. And there was a study done which showed that um, when a stress response happens, when you see like something really bad is happening and your safety is at question, like a lion is present in front of you, your stress response occurs, your blood pressure increases, and are actually in a flight or fight state. And a study done showed that even when you read articles online, social media, news articles online, where you feel that the state of the world is not jiving with your set of core beliefs and what you think a safe world should look like, the same stress response can occur. And you're in a fight or flight state. So I don't want my body to be in a fight or flight state all the time if I'm reading all these news articles and seeing all these arguments on social media. So for me, I set boundaries around that accordingly. But I do use social media to stay in touch with people.
I love that. Boundaries. It's the big, beautiful B word of the year. I would hope that most of you all are putting that into practice. In my introduction, I said, and I speak this truth to folks that are around me. Don't go into the bathroom with your phone. You'll stay stuck there and you won't have a good time. You won't enjoy the pleasures that the bathroom offers. Have your boundaries. Leave the phone outside of the bathroom. So I pass that on to you. I say that jokingly, but we all know that it's true. So I love that you're bringing to our attention to practice boundaries, especially when it comes to our emotional resilience and, the internet, essentially.
Yeah. Just knowing what is triggering for you and what are the things that you need to set boundaries for is really a great first step.
Absolutely. All right. So let's move on to this next question here. How can we work to create a safe space for sharing at work?
Yeah, this is a really good question too, because this made me think of certain leaders as I was thinking about this question early on. Certain leaders and what they did well that I worked with in the past, or teams that I've seen, and how do we create a safe space? Because I've seen safe spaces created outside of work as well, but then really at work, it takes a little bit of a different quality. It takes both participation from individuals on the team as well as I think the leadership buy-in, and the leader has to be a certain way and act a certain way for that. A few things that stood out to me beyond just what I talked about, like how to share and listen, being intentional and patient. Uh, it's not normal for people to talk about feelings at work. So there's no point, like, especially if that's the case with your team, arguing with that or resisting that. That's the fact that is right now. So okay, it will take me longer to get to a place where we have more open conversation. Just accepting that it makes things easier a little bit, and then maybe creating rituals around that, like setting safe space. Maybe you start a team meeting and then you say, hey, I'm intentionally setting 10 minutes for a team morale check, and saying like, how is the team feeling? And we're not going to focus on projects. This is the time to just focus on how we're doing. Or you could create other rituals. A lot of teams have retrospectives, for example. So if you're having a retrospective, keep some time on there to say like, hey, this is what we're going to talk about before we talk into projects. So the more intention and time and dedicated focus you put on that, the more people become aware that, oh, this is what we're trying to do here. And then slowly we can start morphing ourselves towards that. Leading by example, I think, is also important. We really have to ask. I've done this with myself, and sometimes the answer is like, yeah, I'm bullshitting. Where I want a safe space, I want people to share with me, but am I really open and willing to share something that makes me vulnerable? And if that's not the case, then maybe start there. Because I really have found examples where I think to myself, I'm like, yeah, I am nervous being vulnerable. So that's the energy I am bringing to the space. So starting there is a good way, especially I think for leaders. And then if we realize that emotional resilience is a skill and it's not an inherent quality of the human being, if we really accept that, then we can start thinking about, oh, if somebody on my team needed a certain kind of a skill, I talked about programming or Java, what would I do? Well, I'll bring in training. I'll bring in resources. It makes it easier to think about training that way. It's like, oh, I could provide them resources. I can bring in external help. I can, there are articles online. We can talk about it. And then if you start treating that as a skill. And most importantly, again, I'll go back to how we're showing up. Setting expectations is a really good thing too. So for example, if you're setting some time, dedicated time for safe space, maybe just let everybody know. Show up that way, listen, non-judgmental, no need to fix things kind of a situation, but also just let the team know, like, here's some ground rules, this is what we're gonna do. And then it's just practice that over and over again. And I think over time, you'll see people will open up. I've seen that, like I've seen some team leaders do that really well. It doesn't happen at once. It doesn't happen like, oh, I decided I'm going to create a safe space and tomorrow I have a safe space. It's over and over these small instances, this leading by example, that say in a quarter, you realize like, you know what, this person just shared something and I had never really expected that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love lead by example. And I love that even, the transparency and, I don't want to be vulnerable all the time. So first I need to check in with myself, make sure that I'm willing to create that space within myself and then offer that to other people as well. I'm going to flag some things folks are writing in the chat box here. I love this leading by example tip. That's from Jen. Phil writes, I would also say that sharing with confidence gets accepted more easily. Think of your VP in a meeting, saying, I've been feeling X recently. You'll likely accept that and feel more open to share yourself. So thank you for that, Phil. Do you want to comment on these comments in the chat box, Sumita?
This leading by example actually reminded me of another recent conversation. Again, like some team leaders are just do this so well. I was talking to a team leader who said, you know what, I was going through counseling and I was going to a therapist, and every Friday I had a recurring meeting, and I would make an excuse up for the team and be like, hey, I'm off Friday, or I'm doing something, I'm not available, like this is my focus time or whatever. And then one day she decided, she was like, if this was physical therapy, I wouldn't be doing this. I would have told them that, oh, I'm going to physical therapy. So she decided to open up and say like, hey, I have a standing appointment with the therapist, pretty factually, no, not looking for sympathy. So I won't be able to make it at this time. And it was so interesting. She said they opened up, they reached out to her like, hey, do you know a good therapist? I've been thinking about it. How's that going for you? You know what, I'm going to a therapist too. And that created a safe space for sharing. And it was all that it took was like her courage to just be vulnerable in that moment. So that reminded me of that. So I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
I love that. Another example of visibility, right? So you don't have to pour your heart on the table, but you do one step towards visibility, and that can stretch into various forms. It has this trickle effect. So as much as we are being visible, and in the ways that are kind of offsetting the state of the world, we have so much opportunity to do that on the opposite end. So being truthful about the work that we're seeking to do with ourselves, and how that will benefit everyone, and have this echo effect, a butterfly effect, I think is what folks call it. So thank you for sharing that example, Sumeda.
Yeah. Phil also, sorry, I wanted to make the comment on, I just noticed the chat comment that Phil made about sharing with confidence and accepting your own emotions. I think that's a really good one too, because when you're experiencing something and you show up, like say I'm experiencing grief, I have had a lot of experience with grief. So I'll say like, I'll show up that way and I'm awkward and I'm crying, and it's not bad to do that. But at that moment, expecting somebody else to be able to be okay with that, I might not get the results that I need. But if I tell you right now, you know what, I had an experience with grief, because I am confident, I've accepted that, it puts you in a different position too. So I think that comment that Phil made about accepting it and being confident with it, and maybe that comes with like processing it afterwards, and that's when you're sharing, not always in the moment, I think it's really important. It puts other people at ease too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Phil, for writing that response there. All right, so let's move on to this next question. What's your advice for best communicating our emotions when they may impact how you are able to show up at work? What if those emotions are caused by mental illness?
Yeah. I'll preface this one. It's this one with, again, this is not medical advice. And if there is a mental illness or anything like that, I do encourage you to seek help. I'll share from my own experience, where I was going through a personal experience with my relationship. And normally I felt like I could compartmentalize it, right? Like, oh, I can show up for these meetings and I'm fine. And then afterwards I might cry. But then it so happened that I got triggered and I actually could not show up for a meeting. So yes, I could have made excuses afterwards and said like, I didn't show up for that meeting because I don't know, like I didn't think that meeting was useful, or maybe not say anything. I did decide in that instance to go back after I was feeling in a state of calm. I went and I spoke to the manager and I said, hey, like I've been going through this personal experience, and this is why I was not able to make that meeting, and it impacted my work, and apologies, and this is what I'm doing about it to process it. Little did I know, they had gone through a very similar experience in the past. And then we decided to grab lunch, and he gave me some advice on how to handle that, or how he handled it. And that was really helpful, both at a personal level and as a professional level, to build trust and connection. So in that case, what I felt was I had a very clear intention with when I was sharing with them, which was I really didn't want them to think this was anything about them, which happens a lot. Like my work is being impacted. I was not able to show up. So now that will happen. They can clearly observe that. They don't know what's happening with me. So if it's going to impact, if my performance is being impacted enough where I'm not showing up for work, it's likely going to impact my career anyway, right? Because I'm not showing up for work. Now, how do I handle that? I can handle that by either sharing with them and taking accountability, or let them guess. In my case, I decided to share it because I felt I don't want them guessing. I don't want them thinking I am too proud to be in that meeting, or I think I'm too important. I don't know what they would have thought. I honestly don't know. Or maybe even thinking it's their fault. Like, oh, they scheduled too many meetings, and go into that. Like, I just didn't want that in our relationship. So I decided to come out and share that once it affected my work. So I thinking through that, I feel it's more about, one, when we decide to share, if you're going to communicate your emotion, like what's your intention? Is it to put them at ease? Is it to get support? If you know that clearly, I think it helps. And then second is not using that as an excuse. Like if your work is impacted, it is going to impact your career trajectory. I don't think there is unfortunately, that's just how the corporate world works. Now, what we can do is, if we have more open conversations, it might actually lead to them giving you more leeway and them realizing that, hey, so-and-so is working on X, Y, and Z. Again, physical health. If this was my physical body, if I can't sit at a desk and I tell my manager, I'm going to be on bed rest, it might affect my career. But at the same time, if I tell them hey, this is what's happening, this is what I'm doing about it, I'm going through physical therapy, they're more likely to give me some leeway and say you know what, she's working on this, and adjust maybe the external parameters to help me out. That's how I think about it, at least, and how I approached it in my case.
I love the way that you express the way that you communicate. And I love that you said, after I was in a place of calm, then I could approach my manager and speak this way, regarding the situation and why you decided to not take that meeting. Is there something that you can recommend? Let's say someone is going through that exact, situation right now. I mean, not the exact situation, but they are feeling overwhelmed or anxious about something that is triggering some sort of emotion and it's affecting their work. What's one thing they can do to, I guess, arrive to that place of calm so that then they can communicate and let their team know what's going on?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So for me, I mean, there are a lot of different things and it takes training. I just want to clarify that as physical fitness, right? It's really similar. If I am not working out at all, I'm eating very unhealthy, I have health issues, my cholesterol is high, true story happened. So how do I go from that place to, oh, I'm going to be fit? It will take diet change. It will take exercising. It will take changing my mindset. So there's a lot of different things that we would have to put in place to make it consistent. But one thing that I have found really helpful is just focusing on breathing. And this is happening, repeating that is this is what's happening externally, this is how I'm feeling, and then bringing your focus to just breathing. And over time, that focus gets longer. That really helps me calm down. Hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. It's lots of bells are going off my mind right now. I don't know if I've shared this with you all before, but just entertain me because it has everything to do with what Sumedha is saying now. I work a lot with breath, voice, and movement, and as far as movement in the body and just coming to a place of ease. And what I like to get folks to do is to put their hand on their chest, one hand on their chest and one hand on their belly, and just take a moment to, let's do this now. This is fun.
Yeah.
Take a moment to connect with the natural rhythm of your breath. So you've got one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly, and just take a minute to connect naturally with your breath. So my question to you now is, which hand is moving more? Is it the hand on your chest or the hand on your belly? And you don't have to answer. If it's the hand on your chest, you are breathing in survival breath. Let's say the only time you should really be breathing in the survival breath is if someone, pushes you into the water and you have to, bring a lot of breath and energy to save yourself, essentially. Or if you're walking down an alley and you hear that someone might be, coming behind you and you don't know what's happening, then your breath is intelligent and it brings in the survival breath that comes from your chest. Really, those are the only times you should be breathing from your chest. And if you were sitting at this meeting right now and you notice that your chest is doing most of the movement, I would invite you to bring that breath down to your belly so that you can engage in more of a deep belly breath that will, bring more calm and awareness. So that's something that works for me. And I hope that you all can take that with you as well if you want to check in with your breath. I love that response, Sumedha. Thank you so much.
And I love that. I already feel so calm.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right. So I want to flag a private message that I have here. What if your boss or supervisor is the source of your anxiety and struggling? I need to send an email like this today, and I'm really stressing about how to communicate this. Everything Sumedha is saying right now is super helpful, by the way. I'm a supervisor who creates space for my staff to talk about these things openly and receive my compassion and support, but my boss isn't necessarily the same.
That is so interesting. I had some conversations around this earlier today. I think I'll start with compassion first. That's a good place to go to because I know that it can be easy to go to other places. with they're a human being. I don't know what training they had or what messaging they got growing up. So if you really think of them as actually, instead of your boss, as an employee, maybe you have an employee who struggles with talking about emotions and going through that. And what would you do for them? You likely hold a little bit longer space. We talked about it takes time, it takes intention. You would show up with them multiple times in a way where they feel safe, and do that repeatedly, the things that we talked about before. So if you really start thinking of them as an employee instead of a boss, I think that's one thing that, at least for you as a human, like, what can I do? At the end of it, there's very little we can do to control other people and how they act, other than like just influenced by how we show up. So, and then other than that, I think when that anxiety shows up, I will say that for me, what I practice is that, oh, this is not about them. This is about me. What they're expressing is about them. Whatever they end up saying is about them. That says more about them than me. But when that anxiety shows up within me, that says more about me than them. And my job is to take care of that anxiety and get to a place where I feel calm and love, and then I'll send this email because I'll feel better afterwards, and I'll trust my intelligence more in that state. I think that's I would say, without really knowing exactly like what that email is. But what I would say is, like, get yourself to be calm before you send that hit on that email. Calm, do the breathing that just Mariella taught. And from that space, think about, like, oh, if this person was my employee, what would I tell them? If I really had a lot of compassion for them, what would I tell them? And then maybe communicate that, and then see if they respond differently. And if they don't, it's really, again, more about them than you.
And I know in some of these times when you find yourself in that sticky situation of, how do you tell your superior that they need to, be more in touch with their emotional intelligence? It's kind of like walking a fine line. But I feel like for this person that wrote privately, if you are aware of that, and this person is not, again, as Sumedha said, it's probably something that they are learning in this moment, that you can potentially share, ways that you are able to move through the space, and, practice makes perfect, and setting an example by the way you're doing things. And also, don't be afraid. I guess the fear is like, oh, will I lose this job? And will I lose this job now during COVID? It's like the anxiety of that. But I'm also a firm believer in that, if you are authentically yourself, and you are coming from a place of compassion, and you are, doing your best in your work, that this is not the end of the road. And if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, that there's something better coming your way. So that's just my dose of positivity right there for you all.
Yeah. A little bit on a practical note, it just occurred to me, again, as I was talking about this earlier. And I don't know what the situation is, if you're trying to convince them about something, or if you're just trying to get permission about something. But if you are being able to create that safe space with your team, and you start seeing results from that, over time, just share the results, because the results speak for themselves. So if that has led to more productivity in your team, if that has led to happier people, higher retention in your team, maybe your teammates are just like, I don't know if you all do like HR surveys, and if your team shows up as happier, those results will speak for themselves. So just reinforcing through the results, sometimes they might be more open to that than actually just trying to convince them that, hey, we should have a safe space, or we should talk about emotions. Just talk to them like, this is what happened when I held a safe space over time. That might help too.
Beautiful. Thank you for that response. I'm going to flag some things that folks are writing in the chat box here. So Jen writes, thank you for making the physical and mental comparisons. You're right. Our society gives a pass to physical wellness, but we gloss over mental ones. So pointing out that contrast is helpful. Would you like to respond to that, Sumedha?
No, I 100% agree. I couldn't agree more to that. Yes.
Great. And then Phil writes here, it's interesting how more often than not, the people around us are going through similar things as we are. What do you think it will take for us to realize that as a society, actually and truly realize that speaking about emotions is perfectly okay?
I wanted to be sassy and say COVID. What will it take? But that's not true. I think it will happen over time. Like, if you really look at something that's normal today. Like really look at anything that's normal today that was not normal in the past. Maybe it's certain movements that come to your mind. Maybe it's certain traditions, cultural references in your country. How did that happen? It is a lot of like some really big movements. People stood out and talked about it. And then there were a lot of really grassroots things. Chats like these is what Lydia is saying. Yeah, exactly. So this is very much a grassroots movement. Like there are people like Tony Robbins or other people who are talking and leading movements about emotional intelligence possibly. And then there are us and we're doing like more grassroots movements. So I think that's how really change happens and occurs. It's just my personal belief in a society. And we have examples of other things that have now are okay that were not okay previously. So we have hope.
Absolutely. And there, what's the age-old saying that there are power in numbers. So we start with ourselves, we connect with more like-minded folks and see, maybe that changes our career. Maybe we do some career pivots, maybe we move to different places in our towns, in the world, and we're able to see things differently. Maybe it's, it's about a change in perspective for sure. So I often find that, again, as Sumedha is saying, speaking and being from in a place of calm and sharing that awareness with others, it usually leads to really impactful conversations or impactful decisions as well. So Phil, keep the hope alive. I love that question that you submitted as well. So and chats like these, yes, this is one of the highlights of my weeks when I get to speak with beautiful minds like everyone here on the call and just dive into these juicy topics. And Sumedha, you're totally right. Maybe in our parents' generation, like these conversations would have been taboo, and especially in this format, like that didn't even exist. So we are making some progress. So we need to give ourselves a pat on the back for being here today.
Yeah, it reminds me of some conversations I had at work where somebody told me about because I talk about emotions. I'm like, yeah, as you can see. So they talked about emotions with me and then they apologized and they said, oh, why am I telling you all this? And then they said, oh, I forgot you actually like hearing this stuff and you actually like talking about this. And this is a true story. This really happened. And then I'm just thinking like, oh, if all of us go and talk about our emotions and things normally, then maybe that will open up doors for all these other people. And if each of us has that one experience, that's how many people? The 21 more people we're more aware.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I just want to let everyone on the call know that we've got about 10 minutes left. So, if you haven't had a chance to write in the chat box or hop off of mute, now's your time to shine here. And until then, let's move on to this next question here. Okay, I see that Jen has to jump to a next meeting. Thank you for joining us and we'll see you on the next chat. Okay, Sumedha, let's go into this next question here. How can we handle situations where someone at work tells us we're being overly emotional at work?
Very interesting question, right? I when I read this question earlier before the talk, my mind went with like, I actually don't know the details of this, right? Like I don't know what happened. So I'll give a little bit of a generic answer here, which might or might not exactly apply again, depending on the situation and the people involved. But my first thought was, well, it says more about them than about me. So maybe I'll just say, if somebody said that to me, I'll be like, okay, yeah, I am. Okay. Again, not knowing the consequences of that might be one response and being like, yeah, I am. Okay. But then I also really thought about why would, like, if somebody's saying that, like truly checking in with myself and saying like, forget what they're saying. Am I actually not regulating, managing my emotions and being accountable for my emotions? Is there any truth in that statement? I think that's the first step to check. And what I mean by that is, if I'm being happy and calm and peaceful, there's still possibility somebody might come and say to me like, hey, you're being too happy and too inspired and too zealous. People are feeling uncomfortable. The probability is lower. The probability is that I'm maybe expressing my emotions in a way which are counterproductive to the situation. And maybe that's why somebody's pointing it out. So maybe first taking that time to truly check in and say like, am I expressing my emotions in a way which not experiencing them. Again, there's a difference between expressing the emotion and experiencing the emotion. I think we should really give ourselves permission to experience. If I'm experiencing anger, let me experience that in my nervous system versus I'm going to go punch someone. They're two different things, right? So am I expressing my emotion in a way which is counterproductive, which isn't really leading to the result that I want? And am I taking accountability for it? Am I trying to shift my state right now? If I'm frustrated and angry, what am I doing to shift my state to being more calm, peaceful, and joy? I think that's the first step. If you check in and you realize that, you know what, I'm actually being really happy and calm and inspired, and they're maybe uncomfortable with that expression, and they're not comfortable with emotions, then I'll say it's really more about them than you. And again, if there isn't really a clear consequence of like you're losing your job or something, I wouldn't even worry. I would say, okay, and move on. Maybe you'll rub off on them in some time. Yeah.
And showing by doing, I really believe in that. So as much as we, see crazy things happening online and realizing that how are we being impacted by that, and how do we set boundaries so that we don't continue to receive those kind of negative influences. Same thing happens with the positive ones. How much are we exposing ourselves to those sorts of experiences? How much space are we giving ourselves to have those experiences, and to not, bury it down or, like you said, react with a punch, and to observe it and experience it for what it is. And I love that you started this chat by saying we're human, and a part of being human is we have emotions, we have feelings, and that's how we experience the world essentially. So it's this beautiful balancing act that, we can decide to take however we need to, and hopefully we do that with empathy and kindness and responsibility. So Phil wants to also give some insight for the private message that we got earlier, some helpful tips that I think we'll find this private messenger will find helpful. Maybe responding to your manager like this: I need to talk to you about emotions, topic X. What would be the best way for you and I to have that discussion? This could give them the opportunity to say, I'm not comfortable with that, or just say it and I'm open to it. And you can plan your reply from there. So thank you for that, Phil. And then Kay here writes, experience versus expressing our emotions is also a great perspective. Thank you for that, Kay. All right, Sumita, we've got about 6 minutes left. So I want to actually hold for a light pause to see if someone would like to hop off of mute and voice their reflection or their question. And I know that some folks might need that space to hop off mute. So I'll hold for a light pause. Feel free to hop off mute if you'd like to share your voice.
I guess, have a brief question. I'm like currently in the middle of trying to like calm myself down from feeling like my like capabilities and my work abilities are being doubted. I guess just like in those situations where you feel like you're being misjudged, I guess, and trying to come to the table with a calm response and also just like self-soothe for your own well-being. Like, I guess, do you have any advice in that scenario?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for asking that in this forum that goes to like Mariella creating that safe space. You've done a great job with that. And thank you, Nira, for leading with example. Really, really appreciate saying that. So I'll share what has worked with me, for me in the past. And the Inner Matrix group, the meditation group that I'm hosting, really, I'm leveraging that to answer this, because the tools that were provided through that is what I'm leveraging really for my personal life. Just take a few deep breaths and then start with recognizing, how do you feel? If you had to put a name on that emotion, not the stories around it, not what they're thinking, but how do you feel? Do you feel doubt, scared, frustrated, insecure, sad? Start with that, and then actually just be with it for some time.
Okay.
So closing your eyes and being with it and experiencing, separating the thoughts that are going in your mind that you were talking about just now from that experience of the emotion.
Mm.
And then after you've experienced that, and let it express itself in your nervous system, taking a few deep breaths, maybe the kind that Mariella talked about, just focusing for 5 minutes almost on your breath and nothing else. And then starting to reinforce a different emotion altogether. Say it's kind of joy. I'm happy in this moment. And then reinforce that through thoughts. Like, I'm happy in this moment because I'm sure there are other reasons to be happy in your life. Like, you can find those reasons. Maybe just because I can breathe. Maybe just because I actually have a job. Maybe because I am on this call with like-minded people. So once you start reinforcing, you'll notice a pattern with your brain where it will come up with more reasons to be happy. And the more you reinforce, the more it'll come up with. And then from that state, ask, how would so-and-so person? And a little bit more clarity will come to you on how to communicate that, or at least you'll be in a better state, right? Again, we can't change how they're feeling, but at least for me, whenever that happens, I stop giving myself reasons to doubt my capabilities or why something is not working for me and how other people might perceive it. It shifts the focus a little bit more to, oh, like how connected I am with the world. How are things working for me? And from that space, sometimes answers occur to me on how do I deal with this person? How can I be happy with them? So hopefully that's helpful. But again, I really just leveraged the content from that meditation group. And if you're developing that as a training skill, whether it's my group or somebody else's group, I host it as a volunteer, I would highly recommend that.
Makes sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. I appreciate you sharing with the whole group here.
Yes, thank you so much for hopping off of mute there. And wow, Sumedha, thank you for that reflection as well. We've got about 1 more minute left, so I would love for you to leave us with some food for thought and then remind us how we can find you online and support the great work that you're doing.
Of course, thank you. Food for thought, really just go be your awesome selves. Like, every single person here is already dedicated to a cause of growing emotionally and then helping the world. I was reflecting with Mariella right now, right before this call, what's magical is how many people have come out to support each other through this last year of stress or COVID and pandemic. So just be that light in the world as you're going through a journey, share that with other people. And how we don't even know who we end up influencing how sometimes. So I'm really grateful for all of you to be here. And contact information, I will put my email in here, and then you're welcome. We'll share the slides as well. So you're welcome to, I'm putting my personal email in here, but you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn, through email, and we'll share about those, the group that I talked about earlier, and then the mindful use of technology, Quimby app. There are a lot of various avenues to reach out to me through. But I'm here. I'm here for you if you want to talk.
I love that. I'm here for you if you want to talk. Put that on a t-shirt and I want to wear that.
Great t-shirt idea.
Yes. All right. So thank you everyone for sharing time and space with us today. I've learned a lot with you all. So let's go put these things into practice and we'll see you all on the next chat. Thank you, Sumedha, for sharing your insight. I appreciate it.